Thanks, Jane. And thanks very much to the organizers for inviting me here today. As you heard, my area of expertise is actually diabetes, so I hope I can address your needs for Parkinson's as it relates to nutrition as well. Certainly good nutritional intake is important for all of us. Throughout all stages of life, our needs change. But at the same time, nutrition can be very challenging. We're constantly bombarded. Bombarded with information. So magazines, there's always a cure for something. You can lose 12 pounds in a month according to the cover of this magazine. And of course, everybody knows this fellow. There's not a day that goes by in my practice that I don't hear what the latest thing from Dr. Oz is. And of course, everybody believes everything because Dr. Oz said that. Of course, there are many reliable websites, like Eat Right Ontario is a website, but also a telephone service that you can call and speak with registered dietitians, ask your question on any topics in nutrition. Dietitians of Canada also has a website that has interactive areas where you can put in information about yourself, and it will tell you what your nutritional needs are based on your age and your gender. It will also analyze recipes for you on that website. Of course, there's places like the Diabetes Association, Heart and Stroke, so there's numerous places where we find good nutrition information. But many places where we find misinformation as well. Food's an important part of everyday life. It's part of sharing and giving. It's part of family celebrations. It's everywhere we go, food is involved. But food is medicine as well. So today's agenda, that's me, with a different hairdo, I think. First, I'm going to describe what healthy eating looks like. And we'll do that through focusing on Canada's Food Guide. And there's a few food guides out around on the tables. Food Guide is also available on the Health Canada website in much greater detail than what is in the paper copy. We'll also address some common concerns that people living with Parkinson's might encounter, and hopefully then provide some tips to help you with that. So the Food Guide takes science-based information on nutrients and diseases, and it takes into consideration food availability. It takes into consideration our national nutrition goals, and it compiles this information into an easily understood format, and it's practical to use. Because we all think of food, we don't think of nutrients specifically, we eat in terms of foods. Interestingly, the first food guide was developed in 1942, and the purpose of that food guide was to help Canadians eat well in times of rationing and food shortages. But over the years, it's changed many times, and now our food guide was last developed looking at overconsumption problems, so diseases like obesity and diabetes and heart disease. So we've come a long ways from those days of shortages of foods. The rainbow format then is used so that the outer arc, or the green one, is the fruit and vegetable group, and that is devoted to the largest space because that's the food group that we need most of. And then the smallest group being the protein foods, the meat category, is what we would need the smallest amount of in our day. And inside the food guide, in table format, are the recommended number of servings that we need from each group, and it's divided by age and gender. And that's newer in the last revision, so that it was a little more specific. It used to be very broad, so the ranges of servings was much larger, and you had to decide for yourself where you would fall in that range. So adults need 7 or more servings of fruits and vegetables in a day. We need about 6 to 8 servings of grains, 2 or 3 servings of milk products, and 2 or 3 servings of our meat or our protein options. In the middle sections of the food guide, we get examples of what a food serving size is, what it looks like. And then on the right side, there's some additional tips to give us a little more guidance on choosing foods from those groups. So first, look at the fruit and vegetable group. Vegetables and fruit have an important role in providing nutrients such as vitamins and minerals and fiber, and we often don't think of it, but they're a good source of water as well. And this group is the most prominent one in the ARC, and that's emphasizing its important role in providing all of those nutrients. It only takes about half a cup of fruit or vegetable or a cup of salad to make a serving. A piece of fruit, roughly about the size of a tennis ball, would also be considered a serving. So when we look at we need that 7 or more servings in a day, people are always overwhelmed with that number and think, oh, I could never do that in a day. But when you look at it individually in portions, when you make a salad, by the time you add a few different vegetables to your lettuce, you might end up with about 3 vegetable servings just in one sitting then. So it's not that difficult to reach that level. The darker the color in a fruit or a vegetable, the more nutrients it has. The nutrients that make that dark color are called antioxidants, and antioxidants help to protect our cells from diseases. So we're encouraged to eat at least 1 dark green and 1 orange fruit or vegetable every day. Buying fresh or frozen vegetables and fruit don't have any salt added and often no sugar added to the frozen fruits. So that would be our best way to purchase them. Enjoying fruit more often than juice is recommended, especially now looking at the obesity epidemic in children, that a lot of children's calories are coming from drinking a lot of juices rather than water. So they encourage certainly to eat fruit more often than drinking juice. There's an abundance number of fruits and vegetables, so it's easy to get that dark green and dark orange every day. Choose spinach maybe rather than head lettuce. Choosing sweet potatoes over white potatoes. And I'm not talking about sweet potato fries there, that would be different. So looking at the grain products then, grain products are important for energy. That's our gas in the car, so to speak. They provide B vitamins, lots of iron, magnesium, and certainly lots of fiber if we choose whole grains. We need about 6 or 7 servings a day. Best if we space those apart over the day so that our energy is dispersed evenly throughout the day. A serving is simply a slice of bread, a half a wrap, any grains that are always measured by the cooked portion, so half a cup of rice would also be a portion. Many of our foods now, though, are eaten in portions much larger than what a food guide serving is. So if we look at muffins as an example, nobody goes to Tim Hortons, I'm sure. A food guide portion for a muffin is actually 35 grams, which would really be one of those mini type muffins. A Timmy's muffin is actually about 115 grams, and so in terms of food guide portions, it's equal to 3.5. So you wouldn't eat 3.5 slices of bread at once, but any one of us would eat a whole muffin certainly. So bagels, the same thing. average bagel in Timmy's or McDonald's, any of those, is amounting to about 2.5 grain servings. So if you think it's difficult to get your grains, if you had a muffin and a bagel, you're already there for the whole day then. So best if we choose whole grains, certainly. The fiber component is what's left out if we don't use the whole grain. And good to have a good variety of grains. And I find that folks that I work with generally are very sort of stuck in the same little routine. It's potatoes or rice for supper. We forget about all of our other grains like quinoa and barley, and using oats and whole grain pastas as well. So a whole grain includes the bran, which is the outer portion, and that's where the fiber is. It includes the endosperm, which is the middle part, and that's where the starchy component is. And then the germ is the inside part of the seed, and that's where a lot of the vitamins and minerals are. So to look at a label, we need to know how to find that information to see if something is actually made from a whole grain. So this is an example of a white flour bread, but it's the breads that are the higher fiber ones, like Wonder Plus or the Smart bread. So they're geared towards people who don't like whole wheat products, so they've tried to make them a white bread look, or give us sort of the nutrients that a whole grain does. But you notice on this, the first ingredient is unbleached wheat flour. And so that is not a whole grain, that is white flour. The term wheat just tells us that it came from wheat, but not that it's a whole grain then. And you'll notice that oat hull fiber is what they've added to it to give it more fiber, but it still doesn't contain the nutrients that a whole grain does. So it might add a wee bit of fiber to a slice of otherwise white bread, but that's about as much as it can do. This next one shows us what we're looking for. This is 100% whole wheat bread, and so the first ingredient is listed as whole grain whole wheat flour. So always looking at list of ingredients, what we see first in the ingredient list is what there's most of in that food. So we know that this is indeed a whole grain. Then there's the term multigrain. And people, I think, are confused sometimes to think that multigrain means that it's good for us. All that multigrain means is that it's made from several different grains. They aren't necessarily whole grains, however. So sometimes we'll see as the first ingredient that unbleached wheat flour, and that's not a whole grain, but it might be followed by 2 or 3 small amounts of other whole grains, and so they're calling it a multigrain. This example is actually multigrain Cheerios, and don't you think that Cheerios are oats? Isn't that what they're famous for? But when we look at the ingredients, the first ingredient's whole grain corn. Okay, so in the milk category, milk and alternatives are really important as they provide many of the nutrients that are involved in bone development. And they certainly are a good source of protein, very good source of B12, our phosphorus as well. In Canada, vitamin D is added to fluid milk, but other products in the milk category don't necessarily contain vitamin D. So a yogurt might be made with milk that's fortified, but it doesn't have to have vitamin D in it. Cheese as well, so when we're looking at labels, then we can see whether or not it actually has vitamin D added to it. So here on the label, we can see that calcium is listed as 30% of our daily value. This is actually a glass of milk. And then at the bottom, that is 45% of our daily value for vitamin D. So when we're comparing then, we want to make sure that the calcium and the vitamin D on the product, if you're choosing an alternative to milk, like a soy or a rice beverage or almond milk, that they actually have been fortified to that same level. So we use that percent daily value. In the meat category, or our options for meats, we're getting protein from that group. We get lots of minerals, especially iron and zinc, and lots of B vitamins as well. We can estimate a portion of meat. Anyone know sort of what the easy method for estimating a portion of meat is? The palm of your hand. And men don't really like that one when I'm talking to a fellow in the office. But usually men's hands are bigger, so their portion is a little bit bigger as well. But roughly a palm-sized serving is about 3 to 4 ounces. And in total, we need about 5 to 8 ounces of protein foods in a day. And eggs are an excellent quality protein. They're certainly easy to prepare and very easy to digest. And it isn't necessary to restrict eggs unless you actually have an elevated cholesterol level or you're taking medications to control cholesterol. And then we'd suggest you limit, and it's just the yolk part that contains the cholesterol. So we would suggest you limit that to about 2 or 3 yolks in a week then. But otherwise, eggs are not the cause of high cholesterol. Nuts and seeds are also a very good source of protein. They are very high in calories, however, so if your goal is weight loss, then nuts aren't really one of our best food choices. But on the other hand, if you're trying to put on some weight, it's a good way to do that because it doesn't take very much food. Certainly, a small handful of nuts is about the same calories as eating a Big Mac. Check the label before you indulge in that jar of nuts. I know, nobody likes that one. And because everybody's eating nuts instead of chips now because they're better for us, right? It's important also to choose, though, some foods that are not animal-based foods. Our protein sources, such as beans and lentils, are a really good source of soluble fiber, and that type of fiber is very heart healthy. So we also, at the same time, then, aren't getting the animal fats that are in meat. So choosing our plant-based protein foods more often is really very healthy way of eating. On the Mediterranean type diet, which is quite often in the news, certainly meat is not, red meats especially, are not eaten not even once a week, but certainly our beans and lentils would be a daily type of food on that type of diet. And of course, eating fish, oops, go back. Fish, we need to have at least 2 servings a week. And fish gives us that omega-3 fat, which is also very heart healthy. And if we have 2 palm-sized portions of fish in a week, we will get that amount of omega-3 that we need then. And the fattier type fish has more of the omega-3, so salmon and mackerel and herring, even rainbow trout are our better sources because they have more of that type of oil. And best if we don't eat the processed meats as often, so things like bacon and wieners and sausage. If we're looking at the labels there, we see the sodium levels very high, and the unhealthy types of fats are much higher in those types of meats then. Now fat, we do require some, certainly not a lot, but fat's an important source of the essential fatty acids, and it helps us to absorb our fat-soluble vitamins, and vitamin D is one of those types of vitamins. But fat occurs naturally in food, and the nuts was that perfect example of why they're so high in calories. It's a healthy type of fat, but it's a very concentrated amount. So meat has fat in it naturally. Cheese is quite high in fat naturally as well. But in addition to what's in our food already, if we have 2 or 3 added tablespoons of fat, that's all that we need. And that might be in your cooking oils, so things like canola or olive oil are good, healthy choices for cooking oils. So on a label, the total fat is listed, and then right below that, they also have to declare how much of that fat is saturated or trans. And saturated and trans fats are 2 unhealthy types of fat. So saturated fat raises your bad cholesterol, and the trans fats are even worse. They raise your bad, but they also lower your good cholesterol. So when we're studying a label for fats, we want to check and see if we can get the least amount of trans fat and keeping the saturated lower. Trans fats you'll find probably most often in some of our store-bought baked goods like cookies and pies and cakes and things, and fast foods, so our deep-fried foods in the fast food restaurants. Also, more of our snack foods like chips and things like that might have trans fats as well. To simplify label reading though, because we're certainly not all going to remember all the numbers of how much of that should I have in a day, the easiest way I think for you is just to remember using that percent daily value. So on the right-hand column, always on a food product, they will have listed the percent daily value. And that refers to a daily value is how much of that nutrient you need for the whole day. And so the percentage is telling you how much of your needs for the day that product is giving you. So very simply, if something has 5% or less of a nutrient, that's considered a little. If it has 15% or more, that's considered a lot. So for things that are healthy, like we're looking for more fiber in a product, then we want that high percent daily value. For something like sodium that we're trying to reduce our intake of, we want to see that low percent daily value. And it's very hard to find foods that are less than 5% sodium daily value. A can of soup, and not the whole can, just one dish of soup, is well over 30%. Some of our frozen convenience TV dinners will be well beyond 50 or 60%. And even those little, the Lunchables, the little things that you buy for kids' lunches prepackaged with cheese and cut up meat and crackers, some of those actually have more sodium than a child needs in an entire day. And yet those are marketed for children. So on this example, back to the milk, we can see the percent daily value for calcium is 30%. So we're getting almost a third of our calcium needs in one serving of milk, and we're getting a good share of our vitamin D as well. So that tells us what we should be eating, but life isn't always tickety-boo, as we know. Individuals' nutrition needs change over time, and it also changes as our conditions change. We develop maybe high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, in addition to what we might already be experiencing. Certainly, folks with Parkinson's are more likely to have lower bone density. As calcium is removed from bones, it leaves tiny holes, and weakening the bones then as these holes progress. And that in the end can result in osteoporosis. And the thin bones then, of course, are easier to break. So many factors contribute to bone thinning, not just our diet, but age itself. As we age, our bones do become weaker. Some medications, especially on steroids or cancer treatments, have a huge effect on our bone density. Smoking reduces bone density. Excessive alcohol intake does as well. And just being inactive can also decrease bone density. So our bone strengthening nutrients then, calcium being one of them. And so as we heard, it's prevalent in our milk products. If you don't drink milk or don't enjoy milk, then certainly adding it to other foods like soups or smoothies, puddings, we can disguise milk a wee bit by putting it in other foods. And even making your oatmeal with milk instead of water is an option as well. We can get from many sources, so soy beverages are usually equal in calcium, cheese as well. There is a yogurt that's actually 3 times the level of calcium as some of the others. It's the Asana brand yogurt. Skim milk powder can be tucked into many of our different foods. You can just stir it in your mashed potatoes. You can stir extra into a glass of milk, so we can fortify with that extra amount of calcium then. And even things like orange juice, there's a brand or two that's fortified with extra calcium again. So for people who don't drink milk, there's some options there. If you do take calcium supplements, and they're often 500 or 600 milligrams in a tablet, it's best if you don't take more than one at a time. So if you need 2 supplements, best to take them at 2 different times of the day, and that will help to improve the absorption of your calcium. And also, if you take iron supplements, not to take them together because they both compete with each other for absorption. So best to separate that out as well. So vitamin D is another important nutrient in bone strengthening. We call it the sunshine vitamin. Vitamin D is important to help us absorb calcium. So without vitamin D, your calcium absorption is quite poor. We can manufacture vitamin D in our skin through exposure to sunlight. But if you, especially if you live in this area, you can remember not too long ago, that's what the outdoors looked like. So we weren't really getting too much sunshine then. I think even this week it looked like flurries in the air. Okay, so definitely vitamin D is seasonal. Sunscreen itself blocks the manufacturing of your vitamin D, but we're told to use sunscreen so that we don't get skin cancer. Some folks are more confined to the indoors, so if you spend a lot of time inside, you're not manufacturing vitamin D either. As we age, and our skin also declines in its ability to make vitamin D. And whoops, we went too far. The other thing that with vitamin D, and certainly now we're learning more as the obesity epidemic keeps increasing, is that vitamin D, because it's a fat storage vitamin, is actually stored in our fat cells, but in very obese people, it's actually trapped there. So although they have lots of vitamin D, it's not available to them to use. Okay, so magnesium is another important bone developing mineral. And we get it from our dark green vegetables, we get it from dried peas and beans, and our whole grains. You'll see broccoli pop up quite often, so hopefully you're a lover of broccoli. Vitamin K is also important in bone development, and lots of our green vegetables are good sources of vitamin K. Now, often people, if they're taking blood thinners, will say, oh, I can't eat green vegetables. But that's not really what we suggest, that if you are on a blood thinner, it's best if you just stay consistent with the amount of green vegetables you eat. So not to eliminate them, because they're very important in your diet, but to include them, but more so on a regular basis. So if you haven't eaten green vegetables all winter and asparagus season comes along and you eat it every day, you're probably going to affect your clotting time. But if you've been eating green vegetables all along, it's not going to make a difference then. Our digestive tract moves our food through in a wave-like motion. So each muscle contraction moves the food along as we're eating. Parkinson's can affect the nerves that control these muscles, and so food's moving slower through the digestive tract, and the longer it takes to get through, more water's absorbed from it, and so constipation results then. Fiber is an important part of plant food that remains in the digestive tract. And so that's what provides the bulk that we need. And as that fiber is moving through the digestive tract, it's like a little sponge, so it's soaking up water, and so that's increasing the stool size. And as that increases, it stretches the muscle, and then the muscle contracts. So it's basically exercising our intestinal tract by eating lots of fiber. So this little sponge then, as it's moving through, is keeping the stool full of water, so that makes it softer and much easier to pass. Well, how much fiber do we need in a day? We don't need a bale of hay, but we do need about 25 grams or more. And there really is no upper limit, so whatever it takes to keep things moving is really how much fiber you should eat. It's in whole grains, so we want to eat our 6 servings of our whole grains in a day. We can use whole wheat flour in our baking. We can add bran or flaxseed. We can add a very high fiber cereal. Something like the all bran buds is a very high source of fiber. So people put that in their yogurt. They can mix it in with their bowl of cereal. Flaxseed in their muffins, in their cereal, in anywhere that you choose to put it. So when we're looking for fiber on the label, that's one of those nutrients where we want that higher than 15% daily value. And so this is an example of the all bran buds, and so we can see that it has 44%. So, and that label is based on that 25 grams. So we're getting almost half of what we need in just a third of a cup of a fiber supplement cereal then. We also get lots of fiber from our fruits and vegetables. We need to eat that 7 or more servings a day. And eating the peel is important because that's where a lot of the fiber is. So things like berries are very good sources of fiber. Pears, green peas, potatoes, as long as we eat the skin, are also good sources of fiber. And don't forget those beans and lentils again. They always crop up everywhere when we're thinking of different nutrients that our beans and lentils certainly provide lots of fiber. And it's a not only heart healthy type of fiber, but it helps also with bowel function. Nuts and seeds are also very high in fiber, but remember the high calorie part of it, so might not be your best choice, again, if weight loss is what you're aiming for. And then we have a few foods that are just natural laxatives, and your rhubarb crop should be coming up pretty soon. Prunes and prune juice can also provide some laxative effect. But in order for fiber to work properly, there must be lots of fluid at the same time. So those little sponges have something to soak up. So our body needs water for lots of functions. Our blood is mostly water. In fact, our whole body is about 70% water, so fluid's very important. One thing, though, is that our thirst sensation decreases with age, so you might not know when you're thirsty. Certainly lots of medications can cause a dry mouth. And then when we have a dry mouth, then bacteria can flourish, and so you end up with tooth decay and gum disease as a result of that. And bacteria can also grow in the urinary tract if we're not urinating frequently enough. Cranberry juice might be an option there. It certainly, cranberries have a compound that helps us to prevent the bacteria from clinging to the wall of the bladder. But just for caution, if you have diabetes, cranberry juice is actually quite high in sugar, and so it spikes blood sugars quite rapidly then. So we need about 8 cups of fluid a day, and more if it's a hot day and you're sweating, you need more fluid than that. If you've had an illness, especially if there's been vomiting or diarrhea, and a good fluid replacement then is probably more your sports drinks like Gatorade or Powerade that will put back in your electrolytes as well as your fluids then. And then certainly, if you're on medications that cause you to get rid of water, then your water needs are also going to increase. Sometimes we have weight loss when we're not planning on it. Mostly, as I said, I work with diabetes. That's usually the opposite of what I work with most of the time. So for many reasons then, we can end up with weight loss. So if your appetite's poor, might be medication related, but a poor appetite certainly isn't encouraging to eat. We might lose our sense of smell, and if you don't smell food, you don't taste it either. If your energy level's poor, it's hard to get groceries, it's hard to make meals, and let alone eat them. If we have depression, it's also very hard to eat when you just really feel down. Swallowing is a very complicated process that involves a lot of nerves and muscles. If you've had a choking experience, it becomes very scary, and so often folks who have choked once have a fear of eating them. And our slowed rate of digestion, we talked about constipation, but it can also interfere with our upper digestive tract, and so heartburn develops. If food's sitting in your stomach longer, there's more chance of acids coming back up into the esophagus, causing heartburn as well. Okay, we might also need more energy if you have tremors. When muscles are moving constantly, they're burning energy then. So what if you have that poor appetite? What can you do? Certainly a large amount of food all at once turns you off. So best if you just eat smaller meals, but more often then. Including more nutrient-dense foods like our nuts and seeds or cheese, any added sauces. We can grate up cheese, put it on our potatoes, on our vegetables, but those foods are all very high-calorie foods, so a very small amount can give you the energy needs without overfilling them. If you lack energy, we need to try and conserve our energy. So using something like a Meals on Wheels program, or there's a frozen meals program where meals can be delivered right to your home, and all that's required is that you reheat them. Convenience foods, there's lots of healthy convenience foods like our salads ready-made and our vegetables, frozen bags of vegetables and fruits are certainly easy to prepare. We just want to be careful with some of those things like the TV dinners where that sodium level is well above our needs then. So if we choose foods that are less work to eat in the first place, like sandwiches, or you can put your soup in a mug so it's just drinking, we don't have to spoon it up, that can help. Eggs and fish are good protein foods, and they don't require the same amount of chewing as it does to eat and digest meat them. If you're doing the cooking, it's always good to do planned leftovers. Now, often what happens if your appetite's really good at that time, then those planned leftovers aren't left over anymore. But the best thing to do, before you even sit down to eat, put the leftovers in the fridge and sealed up, and so if you want seconds, you'd have to get up and heat it up again, and you probably wouldn't then. For many people, energy decreases as the day goes on. So having that main meal at noon can really make a difference. Your energy level is good for preparation in the morning, but it's also good in terms of eating. Then we digest foods well, and then you have the rest of the day where we don't have to concentrate so much on making meals then. Sometimes medications cause nausea. Ginger tea or ginger capsules can help with that. Certainly speaking with your pharmacist, because it might help to change how or when you take certain medications. Eating cold foods as well. So that's one thing I find in the hospital. When food comes to the patient and the lid comes off, there's that huge smell that comes right away. And that in itself can turn folks off from eating. So having a cold meal, something like, say, a cottage cheese and fruit plate, might settle better than trying to eat a hot meal then. And we can still get all our nutrients doing that. If you can't smell food, then sometimes we can rely on our memory. So if you think of one of your most favorite foods, so mine being chocolate, if you think about that, sometimes even the saliva increases in your mouth just thinking about a certain food, because your memory tells you that that tastes good. So sometimes we can rely on our memory to help us with that sense. If we eat with our eyes, and we do, presentation's really important. So, are you dining like you're at McDonald's, or are you dining like you're at a fine dining restaurant? So presentation makes a big difference. And then, of course, we can use lots of herbs and spices to flavor up our foods. There's certainly lots of devices available to help people cope with some of their inabilities. And I think you have occupational therapy folks here today, so that might be something that you can speak with them about. So safe swallowing, because choking is a risk, certainly, but the outcome of swallowing foods and foods going down the wrong track can cause what's called aspiration pneumonia, and that can be life-threatening. So the signs that there might be a swallowing problem would include coughing after eating or drinking, if you hesitate in swallowing, or if you have to try and take several swallows to get the food down, if you feel like food's getting stuck in your throat, or if you clear your throat a lot, so a lot of the when you're eating, that could be a sign that swallowing is also at risk. If a person with a wet, gurgly voice might also be indicating that there's been a swallowing problem. Getting a referral to a speech and language pathologist would be important with the swallowing assessment, because they can watch on x-ray where that food's going when you swallow. So protein is certainly an important nutrient to our well-being. It builds and repairs our bodies over time. We may have had surgery, you need protein to repair. If you use your muscles, you need protein to repair those. It certainly keeps our body running. And our protein foods include our milk products and our meat products then. But what's best to do with protein is to divide it up and eat it in more equal amounts throughout the day rather than that one large meat serving. Protein helps to control our hunger level much better, so we stay satisfied longer if we include protein at each meal. And if all else fails, if we're still not able to eat well, then including supplements can become necessary. So if you're deficient in only one nutrient, your doctor might prescribe a specific supplement like B12 or iron. But if you're experiencing an overall poor intake, then relying on probably our nutritional supplement drinks like Boost or Ensure would be important to include. The Carnation Instant Breakfast, or I think it's called Breakfast Essentials now, is very similar. It just doesn't have quite all of the added nutrients that Ensure or Boost does, but it's certainly at a much lower cost, and it's in the grocery store in the hot cereal section. So, as I said earlier, food is our medicine. So I hope you now will be able to leave here today with a few new ideas and improve your nutritional intake. Thank you so much for listening to what I had to say today, and certainly dietitians are available in most communities. Most family health teams have a dietitian on board, or hospitals do. Not all hospitals do outpatient counseling services, but your family physician should be able to refer you to a dietitian if that's needed, or if you'd just like some additional help with things. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Shelly. We actually have time for questions for Shelly as well, believe it or not. We've been organized today. So Nate, are you okay to get a couple of questions here?
Only easy questions.
I think that many here have been told by their doctors to be very careful with protein intake in conjunction with taking medication. And because some of us take medicine maybe every 2-3 hours, it is a constant daily problem to try to avoid the protein along with the medication so that we can get the maximum benefit of the medication.
Right.
I find this a daily struggle, and I wonder if you could address in some way this concern for us.
Probably the best thing is to have that small amount of protein at each meal, but in the snacks in between to try and avoid protein in the snacks. So things like your fruit or juices or some of our milk alternatives like rice milk has actually very low protein levels. So we can use that label, look at to see how many grams of protein are in a serving. But protein's so important. We don't need a lot of it, so we don't need these big meat portions that people often eat. But having those 3 smaller amounts at each meal, and then trying to avoid it in between meals and choosing other foods that don't have protein in it then. We need about 0.8 to 1 grams per kilogram. So it's based on our body weight. So if you weigh 70 kilograms, you need somewhere between 60 and 70 grams of protein in a day. And an ounce of meat has 7 grams of protein in it. So it's not hard to get that amount of protein in actually very small servings. So the food guide says 2 to 3 servings, but a serving is 2.5 ounces, which isn't even that palm of the hand size.
I see in most grocery stores now they've expanded their quote organic section. Is organic food any better, or does it change the food guide suggestions as to what levels you should be taking, or does it have any benefit at all?
Organic foods, just in the sense that they're grown in an environment where they're not contaminated with pesticides and things. The nutritional value isn't necessarily greater, but nutritional value varies a great deal in, say, a banana at different stages as it's being shipped from wherever. So it doesn't guarantee that it's higher in nutrition. It just means that it's free of those pesticides. So for some of our foods where we eat the skin and where the skin is where the pesticides are going to accumulate, that might be a time to choose more organic foods. But for foods that we're not consuming that part of the food, then it might not be of a great deal of benefit, because certainly we're going to pay more to have organic foods. But there's no guarantee that it's better nutritionally.
I think we had a question over here, Shelly.
I have 2 questions, but they're short. When you're reading the nutritional information on a package, what the percentages given at the bottom, what age group do they go for? Children, teens, adults?
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you're...
Oh, sorry. Is that okay? I think I've got it right now.
Good.
I have 2 questions and they're short. When you're reading the nutritional information on a package, at the bottom of it, it gives percentages of the daily intake.
Right.
What age is that geared for?
The percent daily value is based actually on a 2,000 calories standard diet. So that's really equivalent to sort of the healthy adult, not for children. So when we're looking at that sodium, say a percent daily value, it's based on 2,300 milligrams, which is the most that an adult should have in a day. But children, small children should really only have about 1,200. So the percent daily value really applies to healthy adults, about the 2,000 calorie level.
And the second one is, where does shellfish fall?
Shellfish fall in the protein group, so a meat replacement. They do contain omega-3 fat, same as fish, but not in the same levels as what would be in a fatty fish. So it contributes to your protein intake.
Thank you.
Okay.
I again have two small questions. You mentioned that Parkinson's patients experience lower bone density. Is that a direct relationship with the disease, or is it because they are more immobile, less active, less able to prepare foodstuffs?
You know, I'm not sure on that, but certainly lack of being mobile is a contributing factor. But whether it's a given, even if someone's mobile, that I'm not certain of. Maybe someone else here has the answer to that.
Okay. And my second question deals with specific micronutrients or minerals and vitamins. I understand there have been some studies done on what Parkinson's patients should possibly think about when it comes to supplementation. Can you help us out there with some examples?
Just in the reading I've done, there really isn't conclusive evidence yet for any particular supplement, like CoQ10 or some of those types of things. There's certainly research on the way, but a lot of it's based on very small studies, and so it can't really apply to the general population yet. So there isn't any one particular substance yet that we can say, yes, everybody should be taking this supplement. And sometimes what we have to be concerned about with supplements is the interaction with our medications. And so if you don't know what you're doing, you know, lots of people take omega-3 supplements and they take baby aspirin and they take a blood thinner, and so they end up, well, all of these medications doing the same thing and not realizing in self-medicating that they're really causing some problems. So certainly, if you're choosing to use a supplement, you should speak with the pharmacist before and make sure that it doesn't interact or have a negative impact on any of the medications you're taking.
Any more questions? Okay.
I just wondered if you've done any studies with coconut oil. There's a book out that
Have
somebody...
you been watching Dr. Oz?
No, it wasn't Dr. Oz, but there's a book, a doctor whose husband had Alzheimer's, who's found big improvement with 2 tablespoons of coconut oil a day. And it also says in the book that it could help Parkinson's, something to do with the brain.
There really isn't any research to support that. Coconut oil is a saturated fat, and so it is not one of our heart-healthy fats, so it is not one that we generally recommend people use. Dr. Oz is big on coconut oil, that's why I say that.
I wanted to ask about lactose-free milk. Is there any advantage in using it?
The lactose-free milk isn't different than regular milk in the nutrients. It still has the same calcium value, the same vitamin D. The only difference is the sugar that's in milk, which is called lactose, is pre-digested. So for people who have lactose intolerance or they lack that enzyme to digest milk, that's a good option to use. But other than that, it's not any different than regular milk. It's good for you still.
Any other questions? We have time for probably one more. Jane at the back.
I don't think I need the mic.
We know that, Jane.
Shelly, I consider myself a reasonably informed consumer reading labels. The only place that I just find it feel out of my depth is at the dairy counter with the margarines and the yogurt. I'm sure you have to have a chemistry degree. And
I know.
a whole lot of people behind me complaining, you know, at the dairy counter of the same thing. Have you got any quick hint solutions?
Well, one is don't take my husband shopping because he never comes home with the right yogurt. He's a good shopper otherwise, but always comes home with the wrong yogurt. Yogurts, all in Canada have live bacteria culture, so we're not really getting more from any one brand than the other. It comes down to 2 things, whether you want artificial sweetener in your yogurt or not. And so a lot of the low 0% fat brands will also have artificial sweetener in, so to keep the calorie level really low. Other than the percent fat, so we're trying generally to choose 0 or 1% is healthiest. Okay. And then whether you want an artificial sweetener or not. And generally, if you don't have diabetes, there isn't necessarily a need to have artificial sweetener in your yogurt. The Greek yogurts are highest in protein, so if you're choosing it as a snack and you don't want a lot of protein, then certainly a Greek yogurt is not a good option. It is quite a bit higher in protein. With margarines, it really depends a lot on whether or not you have heart disease or are being treated for heart disease. Generally, the recommendation is to use non-hydrogenated margarine, so that's the word to look for. It just means that there won't be those trans fats in it. And so any brand, Celeb is the President's Choice brand, is equally good to Basel. It just, I think Basel has done probably the best job in advertising, so that's why people think of Basel as the healthy one. But any store brand one that says non-hydrogenated is equally good. I buy what's on sale.
Perfect. Shelly, on behalf of Parkinson's Society Southwestern Ontario and all of our participants here today, I just want to thank you for the information you have provided us on proper nutrition and all the tips that are going to help us to have our healthy eating habits and lead us to a life in balance. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.